If you see at both ends of the room, there is a camera, and we are recording, and it will be out on the internet at a later date. If anybody doesn't want to be recorded, wants to go straighten their hair, their tie, or anything else, this would be a good time to go do it. Kind of watch what you say because it is on permanent record. With that, I'll start the meeting. The first thing we'll do is I'll start around the room. I'm Mayor Derrick, Mayor of the City of Jeffersontown.
Larry Cheney with KIPTA.
Ashley Davidson, KIPTA.
Adam Forsyth, KIPTA.
Dylan Fisher, Town of Clarksville.
Jim Udi, NDOT.
Aida Kopi, TAG.
Keith
Yeah.
Griffey, Bullitt County.
John Black, my camera, Oldham County.
John Callahan, Louisville Metro Government.
Byron Chapman, Mayor, City of Middletown.
Matt Lanier, City of Jeffersontown.
Bernie Bowling, City of St. Matthews.
Sherry Connor, City of Shapley.
Emily Lulu, Metro Government.
Tom Hall, KYTC District 5 Planning.
Jim Mims, Metro Government.
Beth Jones, KYGC Central Office.
Travis Thompson, KYTC District 5. Brian Aldridge with Stantec.
Jeff Schaefer with HDR.
Gary Valentine, HDR.
Brian Mead, AECom.
Tim Emmington, Trimar.
Nick Vale, KIPTA.
Steve Miller, Patterson, Gotcha.
Sean Dykes, WSP, Parsons, Pickerhawk.
Paul Links, HMB.
Amanda Deathridge with KIPTA. Sarah Berry with KIPTA.
Lori Kelsey with KIPTA.
David Burton,
Brandon Halbert with KIPTA.
Andy Rush, KIPTA.
It is the KIPTA wall, just in case anybody wanted to know that. Jim, you were not here when we first announced it, and if anybody else has come in during that time period, you are being recorded. So please note.
Look good, huh?
Thanks. Look good. Smile well. At this point, it's public comment period. Is there anybody that would like to take 3 minutes and make a comment? There being none, we'll move on to Ashley's report.
Okay, this month we have attended the Middletown Chamber of Commerce meeting, the Louisville Sustainability Council's Transportation Action Team meeting, the Kentuckians for Better Transportation Conference in Lexington last week, and the Regional Mobility Council's meeting yesterday afternoon, and tonight we'll be going to the Bicycling for Louisville kickoff event.
Thank you. Guys will keep standing because you're also in the community remarks.
What we're going to show right now is a quick video about a new online engagement tool that we're going to be using from now on when we have public comment periods. It has a little bit of a delay, but we are ready to go now. So this is community remarks.
You lost the volume again. Lost the volume again.
Well, we tried to do this before and we played it and the volume worked. We showed it during the TTCC meeting last month, and what it is it's a program designed to engage citizens with planning in different communities. The way that ours is set up is we have a website, and when we have online participation or whenever we have an amendment or when we have a new plan go out, people can go online and they can comment on each particular project and say what they like or what they dislike about that. Everything's geocoded, so it is easily used mobile. If you have a tablet or a cell phone, when you're out in the community, if I'm at an event and I tell you this is how you download community remarks, someone could put that on their phone and they could say, well, I live on Dixie Highway and I want to comment on the new Dixie Highway corridor plan. And they could go on there and it would be listed in our long-term plan, and they would be able to say, this seems like a great idea, or maybe we should do this. That way we could take all of those comments, and after the public engagement period is over, we'll be able to pinpoint where each of those comments was received and what each of those comments pertain to, and then go back and bring that information to you all. And it's something we used it as a trial run during the August public participation period for the amendments that we had in August, and we just used it within the like inside staff, and we thought it was, you know, very interesting. And since then, we wanted to make sure that the public knew about it. So we'll ask, once we do the next public comment period, which will be towards the end of March, we'll ask you to share that with your constituents, maybe just tell them about it so they could go on and use it. It's really simple to do from the comfort of your own home. And one of the things that we liked about it is that we can put pictures of the projects right there with it. So there was something from Tyler Parkway last time, and we had a picture of Tyler Parkway. And when you look at the map, you can break everything down from, they have bike and ped projects with different icons. It's really simple to use. When we get into the long range plan, when we start unveiling Connecting Kentuckiana, when David's going around talking to people about that, we can embed part of the Community Remarks software on the homepage for Connecting Kentuckiana. So if you're reading about Connecting Kentuckiana, there'll be a way that you can navigate and put comments right there from the Connecting Kentuckiana page, which is a neat feature. And hopefully we get as many comments. This was a 2040 plan that they used in, I think, Florida. They had 574 visitors go to the page. So we don't get that many comments for most of our projects, but hopefully in the future with this, we can really engage people and have more people tell us what they think about the projects that we're working on. I'm willing to take any questions you all have.
Do you have something that you could, that we can give to our city hall and put on city hall that explains this a little bit?
Yes, I can provide any type of information you want. I think she might have brochures available, and if I can download a brochure from the website for Community Remarks, but there's also, I mean, whatever you need, I could put it in a Word document and send it to you that way if that's acceptable.
Pretty good.
When we showed it to the TTCC, the video, the volume worked, and it's easier to understand from the person who created the software exactly how it works, because I'm not an IT person, but she does a really thorough job of explaining how each of the layers works on the map. You can look at it from the overview like that, and then we also have the ability to look at it with Google Maps and do like a street view. So it shows you from two different angles that you can see. And there's other cities across the US that have used it with great results. So we decided to go with this online engagement tool, and we're really excited to use it for all of our future public comment periods.
Any more questions? Thank you, Ashley. Connecting Kentuckiana issues, David.
Thank you very much. Sometime we've been coming to you at different points throughout the last, actually, couple of years with Connecting Kentuckiana activities that we've been working on. Starting with trying to identify what we consider to be base conditions for how our transportation plan will develop. Let's see. As you may remember, this is something that we've seen before. It's basically the mantra or the theme that we've been trying to use as we go forward with the update. We want to take a fresh look at how we can improve our community by getting back to planning basics. We don't want too many bells and whistles. We just want to make sure that we can make the connections that need to be made as we go forward. And when we talk about connections, there are various modes of transportation that we're dealing with: roadways, transit, bicycles, pedestrian activities, but there's also things like freight, maintenance of the existing system. We are really keen in on the concept of fixing it first. They're trying to make sure that the current transportation system is working as well as it can before we go too far forward. This is something you may have seen in the past. Basically, this is a very simple outline of the flow that we're going through right now. We have the issues. We're going to look at project development, and then we're going to look at the impacts of those projects on the community. At the table are piles of issued reports. And if you want to thumb through those while we're going through the presentation, please feel free. But these are examples of the types of things that we're doing as we go forward with the issues report and trying to identify projects. So when we talk about the issues reports, I do want to make clear that while I'm the one up here presenting the process and the documentation, everyone on staff was involved, deeply involved in pulling this information together. The issues report is basically 3 components that we compiled into a single issues report document. TAD review, and we'll talk about that for a second, which is a very small, localized look at the issues in our 5-county region. A regional review, which is basically looking at a macro look or looking at a larger picture of the types of issues that face our region. And then the crash analysis, which Andy has presented to this committee and the TTCC on several occasions in the recent past. The issues report started as a data process. We pulled together as many data sources as we could, trying to identify what are the current needs that may exist relative to making connections. There was lots of data that was pulled into this process. And this is just a sampling of the listing of the data that we used in order to try to identify where people need to go, how they're going to get there, and what types of issues are they facing as they go forward. We took all that data and we broke it down into what we call 9 emphasis areas, and these are those areas that we use to begin clustering some of this data so we can begin to see a story, see a process unfold, and try to focus our attention on the needs. There are several thresholds that we used in order to cluster the data, and we're going to be talking about that in just a few moments. For both the TAD, which is that smaller level review, and the regional review. And here's are some of the examples. The first one, schools, colleges, and universities. We look for schools and colleges and universities where there are 2 or more within a quarter mile of each other. On the regional review, we just focus on colleges and universities that have 3,000 or more enrollment. So that's some of the examples of what we looked at when we did this. One of the key cornerstones of this process has been the clustering analysis that we went through. Basically, our task was trying to figure out how we get people and goods to move, what options they have for getting there safely and efficiently. And we pulled in as many modes or issues related concepts into the process as we could. We looked at sidewalks, we looked at bicycle access, transit access, auto, and then we also looked at some freight issues as well. But the goal was to figure out how we can make this all work together. So that's what we focused with the issues report, is trying to identify those clusters of data. Here's an example. These are all of the schools, colleges, and universities within the 5-county area. Look at them, on this map, you really can't make much sense of them. If you cluster them, those smaller green areas are where there are 2 or more schools that are within a quarter mile of each other. The key there is that what we can do is when we start clustering the information together, we can focus our attention and try to get a better outcome with the resources that we have available. And we can look at this to see, is there sidewalk access to these schools? Is there transit access? Are there congestion or safety issues that might need to be addressed as we go forward? Do the same thing with hospitals, doctors' offices. We pulled data in to our system, our GIS process, and Adam's going to talk about this in just a few moments, but we pulled in all of the hospitals, doctor's offices, clinics that you can think of in the 5-county area. And if you look at them on the map, you really can't make heads or tails of it very well. So we clustered them. And we asked ourselves, where are there 26 or more hospitals, doctor's offices, and so forth that are clustered together? And then we looked at the access issues and opportunities that are within each of those clusters. And same thing with workplace. These are all of the places where people work in our 5-county area. Can't make much sense of that. Cluster it, you begin to see, okay, here are some opportunities for us to look at, and so I'm trying to figure out access issues and what types of things we need to do to improve connections. Shopping, we looked at retail sites. These are all the retail sites that are in our 5-county area. Again, can't really make too much out of that until you cluster. And we looked at where there were 1,000 or more. No, what was the threshold on shopping? You remember? Anybody?
I believe it was 50 or more, 100 or more.
So we looked at 2 levels. If there are 50 or more retail facilities within a quarter mile of each other, we clustered it. So that's basically how we looked at the data. Now, we broke the 5-county region down into 41 smaller areas, TADs, Transportation Analysis Districts. And these are, I'm going to call on Rory to help me out because I always mess this up whenever I present it. Each of those areas includes 20,000 or more in population, is a grouping of some of the 900 plus TAZs that we have in our region. They cannot cross county boundaries. And what did I leave off?
That's pretty much it, and they are defined by MPOs.
So we took these TADs and we zeroed in and tried to look at the data that was clustered within them. That was one thing we did. The other part that we pulled into that we thought was pretty unique, and something that with Ashley's tool that she just showed us a few moments ago is really going to help us as we go forward. So we held 26 workshops over a 6-week period, asking people, tell us about your travel experiences. What kind of issues do you have when you go to school, when you go to work, and where are those issues occurring? So we employed maps and we geocoded all of the comments that we received through our GIS process, and we were able to integrate those comments with the data that we pulled together. We really liked the process, and here's some of the folks that participated as they point out to some of the issues that they were having as they went to work or to school, or they tried to get to the park, or things along those lines, and what types of problems they had identified in their trips, in their travel patterns. Here's an example of one of the cluster analysis that we did in a TAD in Jeffersonville. This is an access to workplace example. I wish the pointer worked, but it doesn't. What we were looking at were 1,000 or more employees that were within a quarter mile of each other. And major employers, single site employers that had 300 or more employees. These clusters here, these blue clusters and yellow clusters, represent different thresholds of the number of employees that are within a quarter mile of each other. This black dotted line is transit access, and then we were able to zoom in using Google Maps to try to identify what types of pedestrian issues there might exist, trying to make sure we have a well-rounded multimodal approach for people to use when they go to work. And this would be a good place for us to focus our efforts. Again, trying to make sure that we've addressed as much as we can for as little as possible. So we want to focus our efforts on trying to figure out where we can get the biggest bang for the buck. Here's another example of access to medical facilities. Again, we looked for medical offices and doctor's offices and hospitals where there were 26 or more within a quarter mile of each other. We have a hospital and a couple of doctor's offices that constitutes a cluster of medical facilities. We looked at transit, we looked at congestion, safety, all types of things that are associated with that particular cluster. And access to schools we talked about, where we had 2 or more schools that were within a quarter mile of each other, that constituted a cluster. And what we would do is we would go in and look at these clusters. We'd zoom in with Google Maps, we look at transit access, we look at congestion, trying to figure out what types of issues may or may not exist for that particular cluster. And this is all in these reports that are on your table. Okay, here's an example right here. This is one of the Google Maps. This is Frankfurt at Galt. And one of the things we pointed out here, if you'll notice that there's a crosswalk here, there's a sidewalk to nowhere. And then there's also an interesting paved sidewalk that goes right up against the rail line, which seems interesting. So we pointed that out in the issues report. And there are other examples, there are other things like that in each of these reports. Another example, this is the VA Medical Center, the Warren Country Club. You can get there by roadway, but you can't walk there. There's plenty of right of way. You could get access there for sidewalks. So that's another issue that we pointed out in that particular TAD. I'm going to hand it over to Adam real quick. He's going to run through a couple of examples that we used with our GIS system.
Okay, like David said, we have 41 TADs and we were looking at 9 different emphasis areas. He touched on most of them with his slideshow presentation, but he asked me to just to zoom into a few just so that you could see kind of how we did it in the office to create the TAD reports and some of the data that we used in it. I'm going to start off with, let's see, we'll do freight first. And so what we did was we had like just under 100 different GIS layers that we looked at. In freight access, we looked at freight distribution centers, and then high access or high density freight distribution centers, commerce parks, industrial parks, river ports, things of that nature. And I'll just turn those on. And you see it's just a whole bunch of stuff. Let me turn off the level of service was another thing that we wanted to look at to see if there were issues getting stuff in and out of the freight clusters. I'm going to zoom down to Bullitt County in the 480 area. As you can see, there's probably more now. This data that we used came from Info USA data. It was in late 2012, which was about the time we started doing our TAD reports. Like I said, there's probably more stuff now. So basically, you've got a cluster of high access freight. High density freight facilities. One of the things we're looking at is current level of service. I'm going to turn the freight network off real quick so you can see. One of the things we found is when you have a lot of data on it, it's hard to see things. So it doesn't look too bad now, but in a future level of service that we projected for, and it was, what year was it?
It was a 2030 model run of our regional travel demand model, assuming 2030 demographics or socioeconomic inputs, but on the current network plus any projects that were in the works, okay, any that were in the tip at that time, a couple years ago.
We call that a no-build scenario. Basically, it's what if we did nothing at all, and we go forward to 2030. What would the congestion look like? Now, the differences in the colors are the level of service, which is a measure of congestion. A being free flow, no problem. F being gridlock, you're going to be sitting in traffic for a long time. We looked at level of service D, E, and F. Can you point to that on your screen there?
Yeah.
Right here. And so those different colored portions represent what we anticipate under a no-build scenario as the problems or the congestion issues that might exist around 480 if we didn't do anything. So what does that tell us? That tells us that we need to look at that because that can be an issue if we don't address it. So that's one of the ways we use this clustering is we have a cluster of freight distributors next to the interstate that's forecast to see some pretty significant congestion if we don't do something about it. So these are the types of things that we looked at relative to freight. Sorry.
Oh, no, you're fine. All right, so that's, and then, all the things that David just mentioned would be reflected in the TAD report for 30,003. All right, I'm going to move on to community access. So I'm going to turn some of these things off.
While you're doing that, community access, there are some trip attractions, as they're called, that don't cluster by themselves. You're not going to find 2 libraries, for instance, within a quarter mile of each other. But you might find a library, a park, and a government center within a quarter mile of each other. So what we tried to do with the community access was to identify those things that by themselves don't form a cluster, but if you put them together, they do. and they are similar things. So government facilities and libraries and maybe a school or some other type of attraction, we use those as the community access cluster. Go ahead.
Oh, you're fine. So, yeah, the thinking behind that is if someone were to take a trip somewhere, usually at least when I go out, I hit multiple things that are in the area at the same time. So kind of, try and plan my trip around that. So we're gonna shift over to, let's see, this is the New Albany area. Look at, we have a community access cluster here that has, you can see there's a park, there's shopping, we've got high density shopping, we've got a few entertainment venues, we've, several different things there. So in this one, we would look at, I'm turning the aerial imagery on. So this would be a place that we would want to look at further. And then we can do other things like we can pull up issues that may occur in this area. These I just turned down are top 20 Indiana intersection crash locations and the segments, the top 20 crash segment locations. So we have some of the issues are happening in these areas. So that's something that we'll look at further when we get to the next portion of our analysis. As David mentioned earlier, we look to see, all right, if people are going here, how are they going to get there? As you can see, there's good transit access throughout the clusters. So that's one thing. And then we would zoom in with the imagery and look to see if there's pedestrian access. We also did pedestrian and bicycle crashes in these areas to see if there are any, high areas of incidents such as that. Turn these back off. So this is kind of the things we looked at.
But if, we don't need to do it now, but if we were to zoom in with the aerial photography and notice that there was a lack of pedestrian facilities, that would be a problem. Because we've got clusters of people where people want to, where they can park their car and walk from the library to the hospital, or wherever they're going to go within that cluster, rather than having to park one place, get back in the traffic flow, and park another place. They can find a central location that might work for them. They can walk or take the bus or things along those lines. So that's one of the benefits of this clustering. Is we begin to see where there are opportunities for improvement.
And I'll just show you one more thing real quick. David mentioned in our public meetings that we had, we collected public comments. We went ahead and took those comments and placed them on a map to show where there might, to show where the comment was, and use that as in the TAD report. And we'll get the same kind of information from the community remarks once we start using that a little more. But we found it was really useful. If you zoom into some of the areas, this is down on Greenwood Avenue and off the Dixie area. We got a lot of comments such as this that say, access needs sidewalks on Greenwood from Dixie to Sky Blue Avenue. One of the things we'll look at is there are quite a few places that we had comments similar to this where, someone might be walking to a school. So those are, the kind of issues that we wanted to know that help us with the plan and help us move it forward.
So that's basically, you just got to run through what we as a staff, and that was that earlier table where we had everybody on staff identify, did as we did for each one of these 41 TADs, and it's all been documented in these reports at the table. And this is just a small smidgen of the number of reports that are available to us. So after we went through the process of identifying the issues and completing the TAD reports, we worked with the technical coordinating committee to make sure that we had captured everything that we could. We formed a working group, and that working group had quite a task of going through each one of these TAD reports and helping to point out things we may have missed. So that information then was also folded into the TAD reports as well. Next piece of the issues report is the regional review. If you recall, there's the TAD review on the left, the green, where there were various thresholds identified. We did the same thing on the regional report, but we did it more at a county level than a TAD level, and the thresholds changed, or some of the information didn't make it into the regional review because it just wasn't significant enough for us to look at. when you look at the regional review, what are the big issues that are going to affect us as a region? And so these are the types of thresholds we use there. Types of things we looked at the regional review included the upper left map are the anticipated changes in population through 2030. We looked at the annual boardings versus, or the change of annual boardings on transit versus the population. In other words, what type of relationship are we seeing there? Looked at the percentage change of VMT, or vehicle miles traveled, since 1997. The blue line representing a national trend, and the red line representing the KIPTA region trend. So we were able to begin to look at some of these things and look at the big picture. And the last one on the right has the Oldham County label. We looked at some journey to work data. The pink one, Oldham County, we looked at that one, and we used information to figure out where people are going when they go to work. How many people are going to Jefferson County? How many people are going to work? How many people are going to Indiana? Those types of things. So we began trying to figure out, okay, how is this going to impact what types of projects we identify as we go forward with the update? We looked at freight travel. Using 2007 estimated daily truck volumes versus projected 2040 truck volumes. And now, projections are a good guess. And that's all we can expect to have. We don't have a crystal ball, but using that as a good guess, we can anticipate that the freight traffic in our region is going to increase dramatically by 2040. The map on the right are the clusters of employment that we looked at, where we looked at 5,000 or more employees within a quarter mile of each other. And the Oldham County maps are the bottom examples of current level of service versus forecast level of service, projected level of service. So the regional review took a broader look at some of the things that we looked at. Here's an example. On the left, the TAD access to work, we looked at 1,000 or more employees within a quarter mile, those bluish green areas. And then on the right, we looked at 5,000 or more employees within a quarter mile. So we began to look at the more regional types of issues that we had to address. The last component was the crash analysis. We did identify high-frequency crash locations in the TAD reports. But what we also discovered was that as the traffic volume went up, the crashes went up. So we really couldn't draw any good conclusions that we were comfortable with by looking at that information. So what Andy, I'm sure you've seen many times, has presented before to this committee and the TTCC is we broke the crashes down into smaller pieces, looking at intersections, roadway segments on down that list. We compared them based on frequency, the rate of crashes that occurred relative to the volume of traffic that was on that particular roadway, and the severity of the crash. How many people were injured, how many fatals were involved, how many had no property damage at all. And that methodology was adopted by the Transportation Policy Committee at your last meeting. So why are we doing all this? Because now the issues report provides a micro to macro look of the issues that we're facing as we go forward with the update. It helps us to match the various needs that we have identified with the resources as we go forward. It provides that platform for collaboration where we can come together as a region, agree on what the types of issues are, and work together to identify solutions or projects to address them. When we go forward, we'll be using the issues report for project development, for our performance management plan. We're going to continue to work with our planning partners, and this is going to form the basis for subsequent analysis to see how changes may have occurred from one time period to the next. Now, once the TPC has taken action here in the next couple of days, we're going to be putting all of these issues reports up on our Connecting Kentuckiana website. These reports here, they're at the table for everyone to utilize or use. And we hope that our planning partners and others, will use those reports for their own planning activities as well. So that's the issues report. Now, the TTCC recommended approval at their January 13 meeting to the Transportation Policy Committee. So what we're seeking today is approval from the Transportation Policy Committee on the methodology documentation, not on the reports, but on the methodology that we used to complete the reports. We're not doing the reports because the reports are gonna change over time. It's not a static process. But the methodology, we hope to be able to repeat. We want your approval to accept what we've done as a good process, and possibly use that same process again in the near future. Thank you very much.
Any questions for David? Very good presentation, thank you. Do I have a motion to accept?
So moved.
Do we have a second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. Now for the tip. Everybody's been waiting for it. Mary Lou.
Thank you. I want to inform you of some administrative modifications to the fiscal year 2015 to 2018 Transportation Improvement Program. There is a memo and a list of the projects around the table here. There aren't very many this month. We do have 4 Indiana projects. These are all safety projects. There's one that's a Safe Routes to School project in Clark County. And then there are just pavement marking projects and centerline and romo strips. Then there's one project that's in Kentucky. It's a Jeffersontown project. It's the Watterson Trail Bicycle and Pedestrian Trail Phase 2. And this project was lucky enough to receive CMAQ funds from the Kentucky Transportation Cabinet. And so we are adding that project to the TIP as additional funding for that project it's already actually in the TIP, and we are just adding these additional CMAQ funds to that. Administrative modifications are considered to be minor changes to the TIP, and therefore there's no action that's needed by the committee, but I will answer any questions that you have, and if you ever need additional information about these or anything, you can always just contact me.
Any questions for Mary Lou? Next up, thank you, Mary Lou.
Thank you.
Larry, UPC.
Yes, sir. In the interest of full engagement with and involvement from our entire community, it's imperative that periodically we examine the composition of our committees. We've already convened a working group with the TTCC to look at the composition of that committee, and that's not only voting but also the advisory membership. And what we would like to do, with your assistance, is the same thing with TPC. Along with staff, our evaluation, looking at historic participation, trying to find out where the gaps might be in our representation, and to work with at least 2, preferably 3 members of this body in that effort. And we would like action, first of all, from the TPC to create the working group, and then we would like volunteers if it does come to pass.
Any suggestions, recommendations, acceptance, conversation? Do we agree to a motion to set up a working group to review the process?
You're looking for a motion to do?
Yes, thank you.
I'll make a motion that we do that.
Thank you.
I'll second.
Thank you. Any further discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Now, those that said aye are the volunteers for the committee.
Right?
I didn't know there was something.
I just forgot to tell you that. So now Larry's looking for volunteers. I assume I'll be there.
Yeah, I'm happy to serve.
Jim? Bernie?
Larry?
Larry?
Barry raised his hand.
I know.
He got it.
Thank you very much.
All right. Next up is the officers, 2016. You're still on.
At our last meeting, we put together a working group to come up with nominations for the officers for 2016. The recommendation of that nominating working group, Mr. Barry Barker for chairman and Mr. Byron Chapman for vice chair. Obviously, those are the recommendations of the working group. Are there other nominations can be considered as well?
If not, I'll entertain a motion to approve. Motion, do we have a second?
Second.
All in favor? All in
Aye.
favor? Opposed? Motion carries.
We were afraid to say it after what you said.
I know. Other business, anything?
No, sir.
I will entertain the last motion as chair. To adjourn? Anybody? Got the same motion?
Second.
Second, all right, all in favor?
Ah.
Thank you. Good, thank you. Oh, yeah.